Oregon legislators passed 3 whole bills this past session, thanks to another Republican walkout. The question now, can they get at least a little more done during a special session in 2 days? And the Bomber restaurant in Milwaukee is grounded forever. So we're going back into the KGW vault to give it a proper send-off. And our friends at Nightly News have been doing their part, bringing the news to a new generation of viewers. Tonight, we're opening up our mailbag to see what's on the minds of our kid viewers. Here's the story, Kids Edition.
I wanted to open the show like Mr. Rogers, do my shoes and all that kind of stuff, but I don't have that kind of charisma. I'm Dan Haggerty. How are you? Welcome to the story. I really love getting messages from people every night who say, I've made a Twitter account specifically so we can talk to you on this show, or people who are write in and say, I've never emailed a news show before. I would never do that. It's not who I am. In the meantime, here is my take on tonight's big story. I love it. It proves to me that we are proving to you that we actually listen to you every night and that we incorporate what you have to say into our newscast because we think it is really, really important. So please keep that coming because it drives what we do here. Find me on Instagram and Facebook. Email us at thestory@kgw.com or use Twitter and that hashtag HeyDan. And if you don't know what a hashtag is, don't worry. Ask your kids. Trust me, they know, at least for now, because now that I'm using it, the window of coolness is closing and closing fast. But look, there's no secret that the audience of local news skews a little bit older. Maybe it's because with age, you get more interested in the world around you, or maybe the difficulties of life combined with time make me more bearable. I'm not sure. Either way, I was really, really surprised and excited early on in doing this show to learn that we had a very small but mighty contingent of young viewers. And today, I want to start out the show just for them. And we're taking a little inspiration from our partners at NBC. This is The Story, Kids Edition. All right, so Lester Holt and the Nightly News team, they've been doing this great job of answering questions that kids have, you know, talking to mom and dad about the coronavirus or the protests that have been happening, we've been watching in cities around the country. So we wanted to see what kind of questions do our kid viewers have. Katie Kerr messaged me on Instagram and said, hey, Dan, my parents are obsessed with your show, and they force me to watch it every night. My show is a punishment. Can you cover the story about the owner of the Camas Hotel setting a fire in one of the rooms to get insurance money? Allegedly. Katie, thank you very much. Okay, so Lester Holt gets questions about, I don't know, the best way to celebrate Juneteenth, and our kid viewers want to know about arson investigations. Fair enough. That's fine. Katie, thank you for the question. Good one. Last Wednesday, the manager of the Camas Hotel in downtown Camas apparently started a fire in an empty room while 15 guests were checked into various other rooms in that hotel. He set the fire at about 9 o'clock in the morning, so most people were still starting their day. Some people weren't even awake yet. There was a guest on the 3rd floor, heard the smoke alarm, called 911, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and put out the fire. Now, police think the manager was trying to collect some insurance money here, and they arrested him, but it sounds like there could be a whole lot more to this story. We're just still waiting to hear what investigators have to say next. For now, that is all we know. But if you have any more burning questions, let me know. A little dad humor for the kids there. That brings us now to 7-year-old Oscar, who wanted to know, I love the spelling on this, hey Dan, when will people get to go on vacation again? I believe that is the proper spelling for vacation in some Nordic countries. Thank you, Oscar. I know how you feel, big guy. I feel it too. As beautiful as it is here in the Pacific Northwest, it would be nice to get a little change of venue, a brief one, and I'm betting that the cheap airfare is looking pretty alluring to mom and dad. Now, the answer I have for you depends on your idea of a vacation. See, traveling out of the country is a big frowny face right now, bud. The U.S. State Department says to avoid it. There is a level 4 global health advisory. Not to mention, the guidelines in every country, they change so quickly that the start of your vacation and the end could have different travel rules. So, for now, bud, you're going to have to wait to see Rome. If you are traveling or thinking of traveling in the States, the CDC wants you to ask yourself some simple questions first. Is COVID spreading where you're going? Can you stay socially distant on your trip? Are you traveling with or to people who are high risk? It's hard for me to imagine a trip out there that would score perfectly on those questions. Health officials, frankly, don't want you to travel right now unless you have to. But that said, hotels are open, planes are flying, the economy is hungry. But you should remember a cliche that is dramatic but very real. The stakes are still life and death. Is that too heavy? Is that too heavy for a kid's segment? Feels a little heavy. I should have prefaced this by saying the other night I actually told my kids a family-friendly version of The Terminator during bedtime. They love the hasta la vista part. I do all the voices. It's great. Now to our big story tonight. Oregon lawmakers are meeting in Salem as we speak, debating bills on police reform and the COVID-19 response. And they're going to try and get it all done during a special session this week. Now, before we get into all of that, I want to remind you what happened last time the legislature tried to pass anything.
This is a failed short session.
I think this session was a failure, and we failed Oregonians.
It didn't go well. Both Democrats and Republicans called the last session a little earlier this year a bust because they got a grand total of 3 whole bills passed, 3 out of about 250 bills that were introduced. And that's because they couldn't agree on one big topic, cap and trade. So Republicans walked out for the second year in a row. But now cap and trade isn't part of the equation. It's off the table. So they're going to try all of this again with brand new bills. And this time around, they're focusing on police accountability and the pandemic. So let's dive into that. Now, a lot of things are still being worked out, but here's some of what we know is being discussed. First, bills that deal with how police officers are punished for conduct. One would create a statewide database of discipline records for officers that would be published online so you could see it. Another would make sure that officers can't get their punishments reduced if they appeal to an arbitrator, which they often do, and are still found guilty of wrongdoing. There's also a proposal dealing with use of force investigations. See, right now, district attorneys handle all of those cases, and since each county has its own DA, that's potentially 36 different approaches to justice. But Democrats want the state attorney general to investigate all use of force cases where someone is killed or seriously hurt. Now, I talked to House Judiciary Chair Janelle Bynum about that. She sits on the People of Color Caucus, which came up with a lot of these proposals and called for the governor to hold this special session.
If your outcomes are fair and people have confidence in them, then we're probably in a good place. I would venture to say many people of color in this state do not feel that the outcomes they're seeing, whether it's from the number of people who are in jail for crimes that maybe were trumped up charges, or the number of police that have gone to jail for things that we couldn't do out on the street on a regular day. When you look at the outcomes, we're saying things have to change. And if the DAs have been in charge of those outcomes, maybe it's time to have a conversation about shifting that to another office that can get better outcomes for the good of the entire state.
Now, Democrats say they're not sure what's going to go on with that bill, if it's going to move forward or not, because, again, a lot of this still needs to be worked out. But there is one thing for certain, a ban on chokeholds. And we know that this has support from both Republicans and Democrats. Now, it is worth noting that Portland police mostly banned chokeholds in 1985 after a black man named Lloyd Stevenson was killed while police tried to subdue him. But there has been a loophole. Portland police can still use a chokehold when they believe there's an imminent threat of death or serious physical injury. But this new bill would ban chokeholds in all cases outright. The next proposal should be welcome news to protesters, maybe. It would ban police from using tear gas or long-range acoustic devices known as LRAD. That's that really loud speaker, actually developed by the military and for the military, but the police use it sometimes to break up protests. Earlier this month, Mayor Ted Wheeler banned police from using LRAD, and a judge banned tear gas in the city unless lives or public safety is threatened. I will say, since that order, police have still used tear gas some nights on protesters. Okay, let's take a look now at the other focus of this special session. There's a bunch of proposals related to coronavirus, like protecting the CARES Act payments, for instance, from being taken by debt collectors, letting more students enroll in virtual public charter schools, allowing local governments to conduct all public meetings virtually, and collecting race and ethnicity data for COVID-19 testing. One thing the governor also wants to do is to make some of her pandemic executive orders into laws, like extending the moratorium on evictions, for instance, and limits on foreclosures. That's been pretty popular for small business owners, of course, who are really hurting right now.
It at least gives us a little bit of peace of mind and a little bit of break to, get ourselves together and hopefully get some funding in and see what we can do.
It's like a less of a burden on all of our backs, especially small business. I have a lot of friends in the food cart industry, a lot of restaurant owners as well that are in the same boat as me, if not even in worse position.
The governor's getting a little pushback from Republicans on this, saying the governor's executive orders maybe shouldn't be turned into laws. At least maybe that shouldn't be the discussion right now. House Republican leader Christine Drazen said in a statement, rather than focusing on policy bills to put executive orders into statutes, the serious budget deficit should be prioritized. And that is true. A budget does need to be passed because they didn't pass one earlier this year. The governor is actually planning to call a second special session sometime this summer. A second special session sometime this summer. Say that's 10 times fast. But they want to focus on that budget. It needs to happen. As for this session, lawmakers will start voting on bills on Wednesday. We will be sure to keep you posted on which ones move forward. Now, we get a lot of questions from you guys, but this one I want to talk about now comes from our investigative reporter, Kyle Aboshi. He wanted to know why an Oregon gift shop supply company landed a $1 million contract with the federal government to provide COVID-19 masks. So he took a harder look at some government contracts and filed this report.
The calls for help across the country. The president now ramping up the federal response for medical supplies.
In the early stages of the coronavirus pandemic, the government scrambled to find enough protective gear.
At a worsening situation as doctors and nurses try to save lives, increasingly without the protective gear and equipment they need.
Masks, gowns, and gloves are running critically low.
A shortage of respirator face masks has sparked a global race to fulfill those orders.
Weeks later, a closer look at federal contracts revealed the U.S. government turned to some unlikely partners to deliver.
We make a lot of snow globe for one of our customers. We have probably about 75 snow globes.
Central Oregon-based Clark Collection supplies gift shops with custom items like Texas memorabilia.
The wine glass for Austin, Texas, yeah.
Mini replica buildings.
See, that's their Capitol building. See, this one we made the
and themed merchandise from the Hunger Games.
Provided them about 30 products for their show. See, we made this for Smithsonian Museum.
This small business operating out of a warehouse in Prineville had never worked with the government before.
Do you have any KN95 masks in the box?
Yes, we have some down here.
And had no prior experience acquiring medical products.
They've got a couple of boxes for people.
Yet in April, it applied for and received a $1 million contract with the U.S. Bureau of Prisons to provide KN95 masks.
We don't do this on a grand scale. We've never been the grand scale importer of 500,000 pieces of anything.
So how did this first-time contractor pull it off?
That's what we do. Source products, in China. So
Clark Collection and its sister company Original Source were uniquely positioned with an existing supply chain and staff in China.
We have employees that we can send to the factory, watching the production, making sure everything's okay, packaging-wise, shipping mark-wise, everything, make sure everything's, is good.
The company quickly shifted from delivering boxes of custom giftware to KN95 masks.
We weren't selling a dream. We weren't selling a wishful solution. We have been importing and manufacturing in Asia for over 20 years. And it's that footprint that allowed us to do this.
This case illustrates a new medical supply chain where the government raced to find and deliver vital protective equipment during the COVID-19 public health crisis.
I'm not surprised.
Trevor Brown is a professor of public management at Ohio State University.
If you open the box across the country, you'd see a lot of states that are now doing business with firms, first off, that they've never done business with before, and second, that have never been in the medical supply business before.
A review of federal procurement data by ProPublica found not every deal has worked out. First-time contractors without competitive bidding or a thorough vetting of their backgrounds left the government empty-handed or delivered subpar protective equipment. The co-owner of Clark Collection explained those opportunists probably underestimated the logistics.
That is exactly what we are not.
Clark Collection said while it's pleased to have delivered the full order of masks to the federal government, the company is ready to go back to what it knows best.
This is actually a really great piece.
Gift shops.
It's really impressive, actually. The fact
Kyle Aboshi, KGW News.
Really impressive.
Folks in Milwaukee lost the Bomber outside of the Bomber restaurant in 2014, and unfortunately now the restaurant is closed for good. But the Bomber could be making a comeback. It'll just take a few years. Well, let's talk about it. Let's go into the vault here for just a second. The KGW vault to tell you more about the Bomber restaurant first. This B17 Bomber was a roadside novelty for almost 70 years in Milwaukee. All kinds of classic photos show it throughout the years. But decades of Oregon rain and tourists can take its toll.
It drew attention from all over Oregon, and people would be lined up to just come see the aircraft and get gas.
People going through and touring the inside literally walked through 7 sets of floorboards in the plane. So that caused a lot of initial stress on the belly of the airplane and flexing.
So the good news here, the bomber is being restored thanks to the nonprofit B17 Alliance Foundation. And the CEO of that nonprofit, his grandfather is the guy who originally bought the bomber in 1947 for $1,500. Right now, a team of volunteers are working to repair the plane at McNary Airfield in Salem. It's a $9 million project, which is a bit of a swing from that original $1,500 price tag. But they hope to have it finished up by 2035, and then she should be able to fly again.
By people saying, oh, you should go back to China, blah, blah, blah. It's really horrible.
Black Lives Matter sees some solidarity in another community. And last week's story on DACA inspired a ton of questions, including why don't dreamers just become citizens so they can stop worrying? We're going to get into that when the story continues. Hey, welcome back to The Story. Thank you so much, everybody writing in, asking your questions, leaving your comments and your feedback. We read all of it. I know sometimes you might wonder, it's sitting in the inbox for a while, maybe they're not interested in it or something. We get so many that it takes us time to sift through everything, so keep them coming. Know that you are being taken seriously. We're reading everything. Keep using that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram, and of course, email thisstory@kgw.com. One of the most popular questions and comments these days have to do with masks. In fact, in 2 days, you probably know Governor Brown is requiring face coverings in 7 Oregon counties. And Kristen Severance is answering some of the questions that we keep getting.
We are still getting a lot of questions about face masks, so let's get you some answers. This person wants to know, I saw you on KGW today explaining the face masks, but you did not include churches or houses of worship in that. Could you please let me know if those are required or not? Thank you. And that's from Rebecca Pohl. Thank you, Rebecca, for the question. The answer, yes, but not until phase 2. According to the state, the mask requirements apply to venues. Once we hit phase 2, indoor events will be allowed to happen again, including faith-based gatherings, so masks will be required at church. A reminder, Multnomah County is still in phase 1. All right, our next question, this person says, hey Dan, when Governor Brown announced the new requirement for face coverings starting on Wednesday, she said that she will work with businesses to get access to free face coverings. Would you guys know how to get that? That's from David at Portland Shoe Repair. All right, David, so according to the governor's deputy communications director, he said, quote, we are now working with businesses on the distribution of face coverings as necessary. And when I pressed him on, where should people reach out to if they have questions, he said to contact the Small Business Navigator. That's a department run by the state of Oregon. All right, and our next question, hey Dan, can a person still get unemployment if they are employed at a business that is not enforcing wearing a mask indoors and they are afraid to go to work? So for this answer, I checked with the expert. I checked with an employment attorney, Joseph Haddad. He said, yes, an employee may still be eligible for unemployment benefits as long as they take these 2 additional steps before quitting or being terminated for not showing up to work. Number 1, he said you have to report to the employer that you believe that mask use is required by the state. And number 2, he said you should file a report with OSHA or another government authority. I hope this answers some of your questions. Please keep those questions coming using the hashtag HeyDan.
Kristen, thank you. Look, there's another question we've been getting a lot after last week. Now, we told you how the U.S. Supreme Court ruled President Trump could not end the DACA program or the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. That's the program that President Obama put in place. It allowed 650,000 young people brought to the United States illegally as children by their parents to avoid from being deported now that they're growing older. Now, after we reported the story, we got a lot of questions like this one from viewer Lydia. Why don't they go through the process to become a citizen instead of worrying about deportation? It is a really valid question, and it's one we hear every single time we do a story about DACA. The answer, though, is kind of complicated, but it's very important. First, you have to be 18 before you can apply to change your immigration status. Since dreamers were brought here as either babies or kids, that means that they have some time to wait, and sometimes it's a very long time before they can even apply. Second, applying to be a citizen is a very long and difficult process, and it just isn't an option for the vast majority of DACA recipients. So here's what it takes. Here's what all goes into becoming a citizen. First, you need to be a permanent resident. You need to hold a green card for at least 5 years, and getting a green card is hard enough. The most common way is to have a family member ask permission to bring someone into the U.S. legally, but that can take years or even decades. Right now, the government says it takes about 22 years for people from Mexico to get a green card, even if they are the married son or daughter of a U.S. citizen. But if you don't have a family member who is a U.S. citizen, it's almost impossible to start that process, and that's the case with many Dreamers, because while more than 756,000 people became naturalized U.S. citizens in 2018, the U.S. government limits the amount of people from each country who can enter legally per year. In the case of Mexico, just over 25,000 people can come here every year and live here and become citizens legally, but 1.3 million Mexicans are on the waiting list. Protests over police brutality and racism are continuing today. It's almost a month straight at this point. And something a lot of people have pointed out about this particular movement is how diverse it appears to be. There are not just black people demanding that Black lives matter, but a coalition of white Americans, Latinx Americans from all walks of life joining these demonstrations. Christine Pitawanich spoke with leaders in Portland's Chinese community, expressing their own solidarity.
Voices across the U.S. and around the world are demanding change. Historic protests are happening all over, calling for an end to systemic racism. For people of color, whether they're black or another ethnicity, it's a painful reminder of past racism and the racism that still exists today.
We support the Black community.
In Portland, Neil Lee, president of the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, or CCBA, says Chinese people have also experienced racism. In the 1800s, they were accused of taking jobs when they labored to build the Transcontinental Railroad, which they were hired to do by white industrialists. Today, because of the pandemic and where COVID-19 was first identified, the racism has taken a different form.
Like people saying, oh, you should go back to China, blah, blah, blah. It's really horrible, really horrible.
Today's calls for change remind Lee and other Asian Americans of Vincent Chen, a Chinese man in Detroit who was bludgeoned to death in 1982 by two laid-off auto workers because they mistakenly thought he was Japanese. At the time, it was common to blame the Japanese for lost jobs because of the influx of Japanese-made cars.
A huge civil rights protest came up. The Reverend Jesse Jackson actually came over to support us. And then everyone else did.
And now, Lee says, it's time to stand behind the Black community.
In this current situation, we need to support them. I mean, we have to be focused on their plight right now because we've been there and they supported us.
The Oregon Chinese Coalition also issued a statement condemning systemic racism and saying in part, everyone should have the right to live, to be free, and to feel safe. Violent acts rooted in discrimination trample on these rights and violate the fundamental principle of human equality. Christine Pitawanich, KGW News.
A vigil is planned for Vincent Chen in Chinatown in downtown Portland at 3 p.m. tomorrow. It's also being held in support of the Black community. All right, time to get out your phones. Use that hashtag #HeyDan. Let me know what you're thinking. Ask some questions. Leave some comments. I just heard back from the little guy, Oscar, that we talked about. We answered his question off the top of the show. I'll tell you what he had to say after the break. All right, we did a little kids edition off the top of the show today. We heard from 7-year-old Oscar. We answered his question about traveling and if it's okay to take a vacation right now. He wrote in and said, thank you for answering my question on the story, from Oscar. You're welcome, Oscar. Thank you for writing in. We really appreciate it. All of our young viewers, but especially our young viewers like you. The Gin on Twitter said, you did neglect to mention on your travel story that the EU is not allowing in anyone from the U.S. The EU is on kind of like even a more serious lockdown with travel than we are. They don't even have hotels open in England last time I did some Googling. Don't travel internationally. You're not supposed to. If you have to, do a lot of research first before you figure out what else is going on. And then we heard from Alvin Chan. He said, I'm watching you right now because it's a kids edition tonight. Tell Dan to say this on the story. The Multnomah County Emergency Operations Center Youth Liaison Team. You guys might want to brainstorm a little acronym for that or something. He says they're hosting a youth forum to talk about COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter. It's happening Wednesday from 2:30 to 4:30 on Zoom. All are welcome. There's a flyer. Google it. The Multnomah County Emergency Operations Center Youth Liaison Team. Dude, let's talk. We're going to come up with a name for that. Thanks for watching us tonight. That's the story. Tell your kids we welcome them. All is welcome here on KGW. We'll see you next time.